Fiction here. This is recap of anime called Ranking of Kings. Since it's a recap, watch out for spoilers. Bojji, the protagonist, is a deaf, powerless prince who cannot even wield a children's sword. Unlike his brother, who has a strong physique. As the firstborn prince of the Boss Kingdom, he strives hard and dreams of becoming the world's greatest king. However, the people of the Boss Kingdom mutter behind his back, calling him a good-for-nothing prince and saying no way he can be king. Boss was one of the strongest kings in his era, who managed to rank 7th among the strongest kings. Unfortunately, King Boss began to fall in his old age, and it was predicted that his life would not be any longer. So, the King Boss is required to immediately appoint which prince will be the heir to the royal throne. King Boss has two sons named Bojji and Dida. Bojji is the son of his first wife, who has died, while Dida is the son of his second wife, named Hilling. Bojji and Dida are very different in terms of physique and strength. Bojji has a small and short body and weak physical strength, while Dida has a tall body and stronger physical strength. Boss Kingdom do not want Bojji to be the heir to the throne and prefer Dida to replace his father. One day when Bojji was playing on the hill, he met a shadowy figure who could talk, named Kage. Bojji is able to make his first ever friend, Kage, a literal shadow on the ground who somehow understands Bojji well. Bojji gave all the clothes and belongings he had brought to Kage. Bojji immediately left to return to the kingdom, and going back into town in his underwear. Bojji is just totally scatterbrained, seeing that he can't even speak. It's hard to believe that he's the first in line to be the king, and while his brother Dida seems to be the preferred choice for the king, he's not exactly a fit either. And the two brothers have a sparring match, and while Bojji appears to be outmatched, he's very good at dodging and takes advantage of Dida's aggression. Bojji always loses when he fights one-on-one with him. Dida has a great fighting skills. Kage, who secretly always followed Bojji, tried to comfort him, who was crying in his room. Bojji felt very sad because his body was weak, and he was still losing against Dida. Since then, the friendship between Bojji and Kage has grown stronger. When Kage was a child, the Shadow Clan was annihilated supposedly after someone tried to murder their lord. As they run through the city streets, members of the clan are stabbed with spears. Soldiers continue to pursue them as they flee outside the city, and Kage's mother instructs him to continue to the poison forest. A member of the Light Clan casts a spell that illuminates the area, exposing Kage and his mother. She attempts to stall them as Kage flees, but he mocks that their detached force probably already got him. They stab her to death and begin searching for Kage. A count's daughter, Poise, hides Kage in her stuffed spider and misdirects the soldiers to continue onto the forest. A few days later, the king has passed away. The royal advisors began to announce the contents of the will written by King Boss, and while he names Bojji to ascend to the throne, the Queen Hyling has serious doubts about it and wants Dida to take the throne instead. So in a meeting with the council, they decide in a 5-2 vote to give the throne to the younger Prince Dida instead. Initially, I thought it was because Hilling is so heartless and is giving preferential treatment to her son rather than to her stepson. When Hilling let go of Bojji, she secretly worries about Bojji and feels that something bad will happen to him. Hilling actually still loves Bojji, but since her son, Dida, was born, she has become more fond of Dida. But as it turns out, Hilling does care for Bojji and believes that he would make a better king than Dida. However, as Bojji is right now, that it would be a disaster to name him the next king. This is a classic case of tough love, as Hilling is all for Bojji, but realizes that he has a lot to learn, and she's hoping that he would come back a better man through this journey. Bojji was finally allowed to go to the outside world with 2 bodyguards. Dida often dreamed that his older brother would take the throne from him again. Then, as suggested by the magic mirror, Dida decided to take power from his father's body. As that magical mirror is telling him that he must assassinate Bojji, and thus, Bojji begins his journey with his 2 bodyguards, and he's being led into some traps that by dumb luck the young king managed to survive. First, there's the hidden pit with spikes, but Bojji manages to fall in between the spikes to safely get out. Then there's the meat poisoned by a dagger that would have killed him had a fox not snatched his dinner and eat it instead. And now, there's a fiery pit that his bodyguard threw him into. In the wild world, arrives at a hot crater called the Gates of Hell. Domes invites Bojji to take a closer look at the Gates of Hell, but it turns out that it was only part of Doma's plan to kill Bojji by pushing him into the crater. Previously, Doma had been ordered by Dida to kill Bojji. Hokuro, knowing that, felt very angry and immediately fought against Doma. As a result of the fight between Hokuro and Doma, one of Doma's hands was cut off. On the other hand, Bojji managed to survive. He was protected by Kage, who had been hiding in Bojji's bag. Bibin was the one who had sent Kage to protect Bojji during this wandering journey. Bibin advised Kage to bring Bojji to find someone who could train Bojji to become a stronger person. Kage invites Bojji to come to the underworld through a secret path at the gates of hell. When Bojji and Kage want to continue their journey, a mysterious smoke suddenly appears and makes them fall unconscious. Several troops from the underworld kingdom brought Bojji and Kage to the underworld royal palace. Elsewhere, Dida begins to perform a ritual to extract power from King Boss's frozen corpse. King Boss's corpse was extracted to produce a magic potion that could make Dida strong like King Boss. At the last moment, Dida again felt doubtful and chose to throw the potion away. When Dida was about to get out of the dungeon, a commander named Appias appeared and intended to kill Dida. Appias is one of the royal officials who is very loyal to King Boss and Bojji. However, Appias' efforts are prevented by a magic mirror, the incarnation of a woman named Miranjo. Miranjo is a confidant of King Boss, who has made Appias have great fighting power. Because Appias had already sworn allegiance to Miranjo, Appias had no other choice but to obey Miranjo's wishes. Appias then makes Dida fall unconscious and drink King Boss's potion forcibly. It turns out that the potion is not a potion that makes Dida strong like King Boss, but a potion that functions to revive the soul of King Boss and take over Dida's body as a container for King Boss's soul. Now King Boss is back alive by using Dida's body. Meanwhile, Bojji and Kage, who had awakened from their stupor, have been brought before King Desha, who is the second strongest king from the underworld. Kage thought that King Desha was the one Bibin meant to train Bojji to become stronger. King Desha, who knew that Bojji was the son of King Boss, was interested in knowing Bojji's strength and fighting ability. Bojji was then asked to fight one of the commanders of King Desha's soldiers. Bojji showed his speed in dodging every attack made by the soldier commander. Unfortunately, King Desha was not interested in Bojji's evasive ability. So he expelled Bojji and Kage from his kingdom. Before Kage and Bojji left the palace, the soldier's commander told him that the person who was actually able to train Bojji was the younger brother of King Desha named Despa. Bojji and Kage got excited again and immediately went to meet with Despa. When Bojji and Kage arrived at Despa's house, Kage immediately asked Despa to train Bojji to fight. Before that, Despa asked Bojji for a large amount of money before accepting Bojji as his student. After Despa received a chest box filled with gold jewelry, he immediately accepted Bojji as his disciple. At first, Despa said that Bojji did not have strong enough physical strength, so no matter how hard he practiced, he would never get stronger. But Despa will not give up on him and will look for the right method to find his expertise. For weeks, Bojji underwent intensive training with Despa. The training results began to show when Kage saw Bojji could easily destroy a large stone. The scene then changes to show why Bojji has a weak body. Bojji is small and short and has no physical strength because of the agreement between King Boss and a demon. King Boss and Miranjo, who want to have extraordinary power, must sacrifice something to grant their request by the demon. In addition to the age and life of King Boss, the demon asked Boss to have a child so that he could receive the power of his first child. On the other hand, Hilling, who received the news that Domes had killed Bojji, felt very sad and angry. Hilling then decided to sentence Domes and Okuro to death. But before the execution was carried out, King Boss appeared and stopped them. King Boss said that Bojji was currently alive and was training somewhere. Then, Domes and Hoker were released from the death penalty and only expelled from the kingdom. After Hilling realized that the person she saw in front of her was not Dida but the King of Boss, she began to ask about Dida's whereabouts. King Boss, who ruthlessly replied that Dida had disappeared, made Hilling very shocked and finally fainted. Miranjo asked King Boss for permission to go to the underworld that night. Miranjo wants to gather more troops to increase King Boss's power. The next day when Hilling was awake, she came to King Boss and asked him to return Dida, Suddenly Healing heard the voice of Dida, who was currently trapped in King Boss's chest. When Healing was about to cleave King Boss's chest, the head guard named Dorsch stopped her. Because, after all, King Boss's current body is the body of Dida. Elsewhere, Bojji has finished his training with Despa, and Bojji is ready to face his enemies. Kage initially still doubted Bojji's ability, because his sword was very small. However, Despa explained that in addition to Bojji's ability to avoid attacks from his opponents, Bojji can defeat his opponents by attacking the weak points of each opponent. Bojji's attack will be very effective in making the enemy fall without having to do much resistance. Bojji and Kage then thanked Despa for all the knowledge and training he gave. Kage invites Bojji to return to the palace to resolve the conflict in the evening. But Bojji had doubts because he was still traumatized by the assassination attempt made by Domes on him, and Bojji thought that it was Healing's orders. However, after Bojji reminisced about when Healing loved him as a child, he was finally willing to return to the palace. On the other hand, King Desha realized that his youngest brother named Uken had escaped from the underworld prison. King Desha deliberately locked his brother because Uken had made a pact with a demon to become immortal. After King Desha found out that Uken was going to Boss's kingdom, King Desha decided to go with his troops to the palace and seize the dominion of Boss's kingdom. And it turned out to be true. Uken and some prisoners from the underworld prison had arrived at Boss's palace. They then captured King Boss and locked him in a dungeon. The prisoners of the underworld now control the royal palace of Boss. Meanwhile, Bojji and Kage, picked up by the underworld warriors from King Desha, went straight to Boss's royal palace. Bojji doesn't realize that the underworld warrior has a plan to take over the Boss kingdom. On the way to the palace, Bojji and the underground soldiers were stopped by Uken. Uken accidentally is in the middle of the city to slaughter the townsmen. The underworld warrior commander, who remembers Despa's message regarding the warning not to let Bojji fight Uken, immediately asks Bojji to go first to Boss's palace and protect Queen Healing. When Bojji arrived at the palace, he saw the two-headed snake that had always accompanied him being beaten by a giant named Gigan. Bojji immediately beat Gigan and asked Healing to immediately heal his beloved snake. Healing was surprised to see Bojji's strength before she finally said that all her healing potions had run out. Luckily, Kage had a few bottles of potions with which to make healing potions. While Healing was trying to heal the two-headed snake and several injured Cerberus dogs, Bojji fought back and defeated Gigan, who had risen from his stupor. The dogs that had previously been the subordinates of the prisoners of the underworld eventually became Bojji's subordinates. Even Gigan, who had just been defeated by Bojji, became obedient and swore allegiance to him. After that, the two-headed snake told Bojji to immediately go to the dungeon to prevent the underworld forces from entering Boss's palace. On the other hand, Uken, who was fighting the underworld warrior commander with his army, was suddenly struck by lightning. It seemed like the lightning was the magic sent by King Desha to defeat Uken. Despa, who saw Uken collapse, immediately tied Uken with the rope he had prepared. Meanwhile, King Desha and the rest of the underworld army had already arrived at Boss's palace through the underground gate. At the same time, Bojji and Gigan had arrived at the dungeon. King Desha told Bojji that he wanted to catch Miranjo, who had released the underworld lords and brought them to Boss's palace. King Desha then said that Miranjo was the mastermind behind all this chaos. Gigan, who did not want to return to the prison of the underworld, directly attacked King Desha. When King Desha was about to counterattack Gigan, Bojji quickly prevented the attack. Suddenly King Desha got a telepathic message from Despa saying that he would not win against Bojji. Despa suggested that King Desha retreat and let Bojji fight the King of Boss, so that when Miranjo is alone, King Desha can defeat Miranjo and the cursed demon who is with Miranjo. After hearing the explanation, King Desha agreed and immediately promised Gigan a position as a warrior of the underworld kingdom if Gigan was willing to return to the underworld palace with him. After receiving the blessing from Bojji, Gigan accepted the offer. King Desha and the underworld army returned to their kingdom. On the other hand, Miranjo has now been captured by the prisoners of the underworld. She begins to send messages to Uken through telepathy, asking Uken to save her. Uken, who received the message from Miranjo, immediately untied the rope from his body and ran towards the palace. When Uken arrived at the palace and wanted to save Miranjo, he coincidentally ran into bojji and Kage. Uken intends to kill bojji. The battle between bojji and Uken is unavoidable. Even though bojji had stabbed the sword into Uken's body many times, Uken still survived and was not injured. Bojji, who realized that Uken was an immortal, had no other choice but to continue attacking him. Even the commander of the underworld army and Despa, who helped bojji, couldn't defeat Uken. Seeing bojji, who was almost killed by Uken, Kage immediately ran to save bojji. Kage turned into a giant shadow and swallowed Uken. Unfortunately, Uken revives by piercing Kage's body with his sword. As a result, Kage died instantly. Uken then kills bojji, who is already in a weak condition, by stabbing bojji's body until he dies. The scene changes to the moment when King Boss, in prison, begins to talk about his past with Miranjo. Daida, still trapped in King Boss's heart, witnessed the memory. Miranjo was once a child who came from the land of Hamura, the land of magicians. The residents of Hamura were the first humans to dare to oppose the power of the gods. Boss, who was wandering the country and was helped by Miranjo's mother, helped the people of Hamura to defeat the cruelty of the gods. At first, all went well, but some of Hamura's residents made an alliance with the gods to fight the citizens of their own land. The traitorous alliance then killed Miranjo's mother and tortured Miranjo inhumanely. They cut off both of Miranjo's hands and skinned Miranjo's face. Boss, who knew this, was very angry and immediately killed all the traitors. Boss then goes with Miranjo to leave the country, and Boss slowly begins to fall in love with Miranjo. They then met a demon and asked the demon to make Boss the strongest human in the world. The demon granted Boss's request at the expense of Boss's age and the strength of his first child. Miranjo, who realized that Boss's life would not be any longer, made a plan so that she could resurrect Boss after his death later. Miranjo deliberately makes Boss marry Hilling and have a child, Daida. From the beginning, Miranjo had prepared Daida as a container for the soul of King Boss. After seeing the past, Daida feels angry with his father, but he feels very sorry for Miranjo. Daida then promised Miranjo that he would replace King Boss to protect Miranjo, because Daida believed Miranjo was actually a good person. Daida's assessment proved correct. Miranjo, who saw bojji had been killed by Uken, immediately left the mirror and entered the body of a soldier. Miranjo immediately approached the bodies of bojji and Kage to heal them. As Miranjo heals bojji and Kage, Despa can see glimpses of Miranjo's sad past. Despa then told the memory to bojji and asked that bojji could take appropriate action to solve this problem. A few moments later, bojji and Kage came back to life because of the healing done by Miranjo earlier. When bojji rises again to fight Uken, King Boss suddenly appears and heals everyone in the place with the healing power of Daida. King Boss then advanced toward Uken and prepared to fight him. The power of Uken's sword was unable to defeat the power of King Boss. King Boss retaliated by destroying Uken with the power of his mace. But Uken can still rise again because of the eternal power. King Boss then had the idea of crushing Uken's body into a ball of flakes, then burying Uken's body fragments into a very large boulder. So Uken won't be able to regenerate his body anymore. After that, King Boss came to meet Miranjo, who was in the magic mirror, and said he apologized to Miranjo for making her suffer a lot in the past. King Boss, who still loves Miranjo very much, said that he would go with Miranjo to the afterlife if he died in the last battle. It seems King Boss doesn't know that Miranjo's soul can't go to the afterlife because she has violated the agreement with the devil by resurrecting King Boss again. After that, King Boss told everyone in the palace that he would kill anyone who tried to take Daida's body and bring him back to life. Bojji, who still loves Daida, chooses to go forward and face King Boss. The other dignitaries, namely Domes, Bibin, Dorsh, and Apias, supported Bojji. When Domes was about to attack King Boss first, Bojji suddenly stopped him. Despa explains that currently, King Boss's body is Daida's body, so the only person who can fight Boss's king without hurting Daida's body is Bojji. The epic battle between Bojji and King Boss has finally begun. At first, Bojji could only dodge King Boss's attacks while finding his weak point. After a while, Bojji finally discovered King Boss's weakness. Bojji destroys the mace held by King Boss and attacks its weak point. Within seconds, he was directly knocked to the ground. He then crawled over to Miranjo to destroy her so he could return Dada to his original body. But the attempt was prevented by Bojji, because he thought it could harm Miranjo. Miranjo, who saw the sadness in Boss's face, chose to relent and asked Bojji to destroy her magic mirror. Thus, Dada can regain control of his body. After Bojji destroys the magic mirror, King Boss's soul and Miranjo's soul fly up. The giant red devil who used to make a pact with Miranjo and Boss suddenly appears and flies into the sky to eat Miranjo's soul. Miranjo apologizes to King Boss because she can't go to the afterlife with him. A few seconds later, the red demon was struck by a thunderbolt sent by King Desha. The commander of the underworld army immediately decapitated the red demon before the demon recovered. Despa then made an offer with the red demon. He would return the red demon's head if the demon was willing to grant one wish. When Despa was about to say his request, suddenly Dada appeared and said his request first. Dada wants the demon to bring Miranjo back to life. The red devil immediately granted Dada's request. Dada has now kept his promise to protect Miranjo. Seeing the presence of Miranjo, who was able to live again, Despa was happy and gave up his request to be taken by Dada. Hilling, who saw her two beloved children survive, immediately hugged them both with a happy feeling. In the end, everyone in the palace forgives Miranjo's previous actions. Miranjo has promised that she will change herself into a better person. After that, Dada knelt before Bojji and handed over the royal throne to him. From that day on, Bojji received the title of king in the Boss Kingdom. Everyone was happy to welcome their new king. Kage, who felt that his task had been completed, decided to leave Bojji and Boss's palace. The next day, when the inauguration for the new king took place, Bojji just realized that Kage had disappeared. Bojji, who felt confused, immediately tried to find Kage throughout the palace, but he couldn't find him. Even though Bojji has become a king who is loved by his people and can carry out his duties fairly, Bojji still feels that something is missing from him. Hilling realized this and immediately told Bojji that he no longer needed to hold back and was allowed to seek freedom with Kage. Hilling always thought that Kage was a true friend who made Bojji happy and shine brightly. Hearing this, Bojji decides to return the title of king to Dada and goes on a quest to find Kage. After several days of traveling, Bojji was finally able to meet Kage again. Bojji was so happy that he burst into tears. Although initially, Kage was angry at Bojji, who gave up his position as king. But Bojji manages to convince Kage that he will wander and build an empire of his own. The film closes with a scene where Bojji and Kage walk together to continue their long adventure. For more anime content, subscribe to my channel.